Welcome to Mission Majjhima. Ajahn.
Ajahn.
Ajahn, so tell us about Majjhima number 54, the Potaliya Sutta.
So this is a really good discourse. It begins in the town of Apana, where the Buddha goes for alms and then retreats to a grove for the day's abiding. And a man in sandals and with a parasol named Potaliya comes to him, and the Buddha invites him to sit, addressing him as householder, Gahapati. And Potaliya is not happy about this and stews as the Buddha invites him 3 times until finally Potaliya says, "I've cut off my affairs, actually. Why do you address me as householder?" And the Buddha asks how exactly he's cut off his affairs, and he states that he's given all of his wealth to his children. But the Buddha says, in the discipline of the noble ones, this is not the cutting off of affairs. And then he kind of waits for Potaliya to ask, okay, what is the cutting off of affairs? And important to note there, the Buddha's kind of nuance of conversation where he waits until asked before really going into any more. The Blessed One goes on to say, this is not the complete giving up of everything in every way of all affairs. And Potaliya asks, okay, though these lead to the cutting off of affairs, they are not the entirety of it, so what is? And the Buddha goes on to speak about the giving up of sensual desires. And this relates to another sutta called the Sabha Sutta, where the Buddha says that the all is the 6 sense bases, basically. And so the giving up of all, in this case, is movement away from these 6 sense bases back into a unity of equanimity. And so, when he's asked how to give up the all, or giving up affairs in every way, he is speaking about giving up of these sensual ties. And he goes into this list, which is famous, worth memorizing, and just brilliant, of these similes for sensuality. First, he says sensuality is like a dog, or sensual desires are like a smeared skeleton or bone thrown from a skilled butcher, which a dog would gnaw on and get no sustenance. And he then asks Potaliya, would that dog gnawing on the bone become full? And Potaliya says no. Even so, the Buddha says, sensual desires have been compared to a skeleton by the Blessed One. They are dangerous, of little gratification, and the drawbacks in them are great, and so should be given up. He then compares sensuality to a piece of meat held by a hawk, and it's harried by other birds as they try to rip it to shreds to get to the meat. Even so, if one does not give up sensual desires, one is harried by others, basically. To a grass torch on fire held against the wind so that it burns the arm of the person holding it. To a pit of coals as high up as a man is tall, so that one drawn towards it by 2 strong men would writhe their body trying to escape being cast into that pit of coals. He then compares it to a dream of parks which disappears, of gardens which disappears, to borrowed goods, where one enters a square adorned with goods, and then the owners of those goods take them back. And finally to a fruit on top of a tree, where when one climbed to get the fruit, another person desiring that same fruit would chop the tree down, and that person would come to death or deadly suffering. So these are not flattering images for sensuality. And the Buddha then goes on to speak about how once one has drawn one's mind back from the all, from that sensuality, those sensual ties, how one then gains equanimity, uses the 4th jhana, this purity of mindfulness, which is associated with the 4th jhana, as a basis for psychic power, for the te-vijja, the insight knowledges, and for awakening. And then Potaliya has a lot of faith, actually. It really speaks to his kind of wisdom that at that point he says, how could I understand this? The Buddha is so far above me in understanding, and then speaks about how he'd misconceived the Blessed One's disciples, and now has great faith. So it's just sort of a beautiful resolution and amazing list. Ajahn, what would you draw out of this discourse?
just to ask ourselves, what are our parasols? What are the attachments, the affairs that we still bring to our practice? If we're going on retreat, do we still bring our phone? This is a modern affair that we bring into our Dhamma lives, or just how connected and non-cut off are we? And so looking at that, and then just the nuances, and would just invite everybody to look at these similes oneself. There are 7 of them, and just, I think everyone might be able to have their own nuanced takeaways from this. So we have a butcher behind a butcher shop, pointing to the marketplace of sensuality, which is really the rivers and the ocean in which we live in modern day America. Even when we're just by ourselves, we've got our phones, which are trying to sell us stuff all the time, and goes and gets a fully cleaned bone. It's just got the color of blood on it. We just gnaw away, and it's just never satisfying. So that's an insight there. We've got 3 types of birds. We've got vultures, herons, and hawks who are chasing after the same piece of meat. So vultures, which are, the parts of us which chase after carcass, things which are just dead, things which are dirty, our very coarse sensual desires and cravings. In the herons, which have this long neck and maybe more refined desires of the palate, and then the hawks, which are just willing to swoop in, but are quite refined, flying quite high, good eyesight, but still rapacious. So these first 2 are about craving for foods, and then we've got the third one running with a blazing grass torch, possibly phallic, just the heat of endless running and the fire which we have caused ourselves. We set ourselves on fire. And each of them really just invite people to look at that. How are our sensual desires like a coal pit, or like dreams of pleasure parks, or like borrowed goods, or like fruits in a tree which is liable to be cut down by others? It's like, even if we're living in a place of relative stability, so many of our sensual pleasures are built on and dependent on the suffering of many people. You remember reading an article about the suffering and involved in just Amazon warehouses, all the people who just live these lives of drudgery, getting us all of our Amazon delivered next day, shipped goods. So look at these for oneself and see how that might affect one's desire to cling to them. Ajahn, do you want to pull out anything else in the sutta?
Just the nuances of the sensuality you're talking about, those images are worth looking into. And as to the nuances of those similes, the fact that the Buddha, or the dog, is really tasting only its own saliva. And the Buddha says that sensuality is a person's devotion to the senses, to sense pleasure. So it's our own saliva that we're tasting, really, our own desire that we're so stuck on.
It's not the object itself.
Yeah. And the other thing is with the fruit tree, how even if our ethics around obtaining sensual pleasures can be quite clean, it doesn't mean others will be, and we're still in danger. And in particular, the person who cuts down the tree thinks, I do not know how to climb a tree. So if we're at the top of a huge edifice of society or structure, if others don't feel like they have access to it, we're in a very precarious position. And sensuality opens us up to that fragility. So when we give these things up, we come to a stability which is beyond all these kind of vicissitudes.
So, Ajahn, what is the word of the week?
The word of the week is kama, and that's K, long A, 1 M, A. And different than kama is an action, and it means sensuality, and it comes from the word kam, which means to crave.